What's up guys, my name is Adrian Rivera and today I'm going to show you how to use the compressor in FL Studio 20 to get your audio sounding a lot better. But before I do that, I'm going to eat a chicken sandwich. So why do we compress? Compression essentially is to get the highest part of your audio file and the lowest part and squash them together so it can sound a little more balanced and uniform in your mix. Now, to visualize this for you guys a little bit more, let's say that the top of this chicken sandwich was the loudest part of your audio file and the bottom of the chicken sandwich was the quietest part of your audio file. What compression does is it squishes your chicken sandwich. Now what compression does is that it squishes your audio file so everything is a little more flat and even and it can fit better into your mouth. Pretty good, bro. But now let's show you how this all looks in FL Studio. Alright, so I'm here in FL Studio and for this tutorial I'm going to be using the Fruity limiter because if you didn't know, the limiter actually has a compression section on it and it makes it a lot easier to visualize what's going on with the compression. Alright, so first knob I'm going to be going over is the threshold knob. Now what the threshold tells us is that any decibel level above where we set the threshold is going to be compressed and anything below that is not going to be affected whatsoever. So if we set the threshold to negative 14 decibels, anything above negative 14 decibels is going to be affected by the compression and anything below 14 decibels is not going to be affected at all. Next we have the ratio. Now what the ratio is how much we are going to be compressing by. So if you look at the hint box at the top left corner of FL Studio, it shows 1.5 to 1 or 1.8 to 1, and as I move this you see it keeps increasing 2.7 to 1. What this means is that every 2.7 decibels above the threshold, that will be converted to 1 decibel. So if we have 4 decibels above the threshold, those 4 decibels will be squashed down into 2 decibels. Now another thing we have is called the knee. Essentially what the knee is how gradual of a transition you want the ratio to kick in from the threshold. So you know how I said anything below this threshold will not be affected by the compressor whatsoever? The higher of a knee you have, the more it's going to let the compressor kick in below the threshold. So even though it says 14 decibels for this threshold, because the knee is set to 26%, compression will start to happen even more below negative 14 decibels. Next what we have is attack. Now what attack means is how much time it takes for the compressor to kick in after the audio has been initially input into the compressor. So if I have an attack of 5 milliseconds, once the audio is run into the compressor, it'll take 5 milliseconds for the compressor to actually affect the audio. And release is the exact opposite of that. Release is how long it takes for the compressor to stop working after the audio has ended. And sustain could get a little bit confusing. Basically what it is how long it sustains the compressor before the release goes into effect. And I'll demonstrate what I mean by that in a little bit. Noise gate is essentially a compressor in reverse. When you set the threshold, instead of everything above the threshold being affected, everything below the threshold is going to be affected. So if you have a threshold of negative 19 decibels and you set the gain to 0, anything below 19 decibels is going to be cut out completely. So this is good if you have some background noise going on in your vocals and you don't want that to be heard when there's nothing happening. A noise gate is going to completely cut that out depending on how much gain reduction you put on there. And release is essentially the same thing as the release of the compressor. Curve is the gradualness of the attack and the release. So basically how gradual the transition is between the attack and the release. Sidechain is something that I'm going to get to in a little bit, so just stick around. Gain is how much we boost the overall volume after the compression has happened. And saturation is how much harmonic overtones or shine is added to the audio file that we put into the compressor. Now what exactly do I mean by all this stuff? Well, let me show you. Now what I have right here is a single tone sine wave that's playing repeatedly at different volumes. So give it a listen. I'm going to be using this to show you exactly what a compressor does. So first thing I want to go over is the saturation. If you look at this EQ, you'll notice that when I play a sine wave, it's on a single frequency. However, if I bring up the saturation all the way and we look at the EQ again after we play the sine wave, you can see and hear more harmonic overtones added to the sine wave. So this just gives it a little bit more shine to your audio files, and it all depends on how much you want to add. Now, since everything is playing at a different volume, what I want to do with this compressor is make everything the same volume. So you can see right here the volume from all the different sine waves that just played. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring down the threshold to about a little under the top of the quietest sine wave. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the ratio to about 20:1 just to show you this a little more effectively. Now, when you use your compressor on your audio, don't go too extreme. Make sure that you're using reasonable amounts of compression based on what you want to hear. But if we have a listen now, you can see and hear that everything is about the same volume. Now, what we can do is we can bring up the gain so that everything after compression overall is just louder. So if we give it a listen, everything is much louder. Now let's say I wanted the compressor to engage a little bit after the first sine wave is heard. What I'm going to do is I'm going to up the attack, and now I want you to hear and notice how the compression looks like. Because we have a slower attack, there's that initial hit that happens before the compression actually engages. And now you can hear that there's an initial hit before the sine wave gets down to the volume as the other sine wave over here. Now let's say I wanted the compression to stop a little sooner. What I can do is I can bring down the release just a bit, and you'll hear that the end of the compression sounds a little louder. Now if I wanted the attack and release to be a little more gradual, what I can do is change the curve, and you'll be able to see and hear what that looks like. And now if I were to bring up the sustain, you'll see that after the sine wave has finished playing, the compression will still carry on for the set amount of time that I put. So if I set this to 200 milliseconds, take a look at what happens. It spreads it out a little longer and adds a slight curve to it. Now let's reset everything and show you what noise gate is. So let's set the threshold a little bit over the quietest sine wave there is here. And let's bring the gain all the way down and have the release set at default. We should not be able to hear this sine wave anymore because it is below the threshold we set, but all the other sine waves are still going to be audible. So let's give it a listen. So if you have some unwanted noise that you don't want coming through your audio file, having it below this noise gate threshold will make it inaudible. Now what about sidechaining? Well, if you sidechain this compressor to something, this compressor will activate when a different audio file is played. So for example, I have this kick here playing simultaneously as a sine wave. So if we give it a listen, that's what it sounds like. Now I want to sidechain this kick to this compressor so that this compressor activates when the kick hits. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the kick on the mixer channel and right click this arrow and click sidechain to this track. And you'll see that it is connected to this mixer track as well. Now if we go back to the compressor and we go to sidechain and we scroll up, you'll see 1. We could also right click and select kick. So now let's set the threshold and ratio to extreme. You'll notice that whenever the kick kicks in, the sine wave will be compressed to dodge out of the way of the kick. So if we click play, that's exactly what just happened. And when it's not so drastic, it can make for some cool effects. So this is basically everything you need to know about compression in FL Studio. If you like this video, make sure you leave a like, subscribe for more content about music production in FL Studio, and leave a comment about what you want to see next. Make sure to DM me on Instagram or Twitter if you have any questions or just want to get into contact with me. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, don't be afraid to show your genius.